Genesis makes it clear that one of the 4 rivers there in the Garden of Eden is the Gihon.
Everyone thinks they already know how the story of the Garden of Eden ended. But what if the version we grew up hearing is not the full story at all? Eve, knowing her life was coming to an end, gathered her children close because she was afraid the truth would disappear with her. In ancient Ethiopian manuscripts that most people have never even heard about, she supposedly revealed what really happened in the garden, and the details are nothing like the traditional story. Keep watching till the end, because what Eve allegedly confessed changes everything. What the traditional Bible tells us about Eden. The book of Genesis describes Eden as a perfect place, almost like paradise on earth, a garden where nothing was broken, nothing was painful, and nothing ever died. God planted the garden personally and placed the first humans there so life could be lived in peace, with work that was not stressful and with a close relationship with the Creator. The description even says that God walked in the garden during the cool part of the day, which makes the whole place feel peaceful and close, almost like life was meant to be simple from the beginning. Rivers flowed out of Eden and spread into the rest of the world, and every tree that grew there looked beautiful and also produced good food. In the middle of the garden stood 2 very important trees, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Why would 2 trees be placed right in the center if one of those trees was not supposed to be touched? That question alone makes the story feel deeper than it first sounds. The creation of Adam is described in a very direct way. God formed Adam from dust and breathed life into him, turning dust into a living human being. Adam became the first person and received the responsibility to take care of the garden and to name every animal. The story slows down at this point, and something unusual appears. Everything God created before this moment was called good, but Adam being alone was called not good. Why would a perfect world still have something missing? God allowed Adam to see every animal in pairs, male and female, living together, while Adam stood alone with no partner. Only after that moment did God cause a deep sleep to fall on Adam and take one rib, then form Eve from that rib. This way of creating Eve showed that man and woman were meant to depend on each other and live as one. Eve received the name because life would continue through her, and the timing of her creation made companionship look like something necessary, not optional. Does that make the story feel less like a simple creation tale and more like a lesson about human nature? Then the story changes tone when the serpent enters the garden. The serpent is described as more clever than any other animal, and the first thing the serpent does is ask a question. The serpent does not begin with force or threat, but with doubt. God had allowed Adam and Eve to eat from every tree except one, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The serpent asked Eve if God really said the fruit could not be eaten. That small question opened the door to a bigger one. Why would God forbid one tree in a place that was supposed to be perfect? The serpent told Eve that eating the fruit would not lead to death, but would lead to knowledge, the kind of knowledge that would make humans like God. Eve looked at the fruit and noticed 3 things. The fruit looked good for food, the fruit looked beautiful, and the fruit seemed able to give wisdom. Those 3 reasons were enough. Eve ate the fruit and then gave some to Adam, who was standing there with her. Why did Adam stay silent until that moment? That part of the story always makes people stop and think. The moment the fruit was eaten, everything changed. The first change was not thunder or fire, but awareness. Adam and Eve suddenly realized nakedness and felt shame, something that never existed before. When God came into the garden, Adam hid, which was another thing that never happened before. Questions started to be asked, and answers started to sound like excuses. The serpent was cursed to crawl. Eve was told that pain would come with childbirth, and that life would include struggle in relationships. And Adam was told that the ground itself would become difficult to work. Food would still grow, but only through sweat and effort. Even the earth would no longer feel easy to live on. Why would one decision change the whole world so much? That question sits right at the center of the story. The final part of the account explains why Adam and Eve could not stay in Eden. God said that if the tree of life was eaten after the tree of knowledge, life would continue forever in a broken state. Because of that, Adam and Eve were sent out of the garden. The entrance to Eden was guarded by cherubim and a flaming sword, so nobody could return. That ending makes the story feel both sad and serious. A perfect place existed, humans lived there. One choice changed everything, and the way back was closed. And that leads to another question that many people quietly ask when hearing this story again. If Eden was perfect, then the presence of that tree has always felt like the one detail that refuses to sit quietly in the background. For generations, people have gone over that part of the story again and again, trying to understand why something so small could carry such enormous consequences. The more you think about it, the more the whole story starts to feel less like a simple warning and more like a mystery that was never fully explained. That is exactly why the story of the Garden of Eden never fades away. Thousands of years later, people are still reading it, still debating it, and still noticing details that seem to hint that there is more going on beneath the surface than what we were first told. And this is where the story takes a turn that most people never hear about. There is an old account that talks about something Eve said near the end of her life, a confession that completely changes the way the entire story can be understood. When you hear what she claimed on her deathbed, the events in Eden start to look very different, almost as if the fall was not as simple as it sounded at first. Stay with me till the very end, because this next part, Eve's deathbed confession, is where the story becomes far more unsettling than most people expect. Eve's deathbed confession. 6 days after Adam passed, the mood around Eve changed in a way that everyone could feel without anyone saying much. Eve seemed to understand that the end of life was getting close, and that feeling brought a sense of urgency that could not be ignored. A quiet thought started to form. What would a person do when the end felt near and unfinished words still remained? Eve decided that silence could not continue, and a final gathering had to happen. Every son and every daughter was called together, because nothing important should be left unsaid at a moment like that. Seth arrived along with 30 brothers and 30 sisters, and the gathering became large, almost overwhelming, like the whole human family standing in one place, waiting to hear something serious. Why call everyone at once? Why not speak to only a few? Eve made it clear that every child needed to hear the truth directly, without change, without confusion, and without anyone passing the message in the wrong way later. When everyone settled, Eve began speaking slowly, as if every word carried weight that could not be taken back. Eve said that the message about to be shared came from the archangel Michael, the same message given after the command of God had been broken in the garden. That statement alone made the gathering tense, because everyone knew that moment in the garden changed everything. What exactly happened back then? Why did the warning matter so much now, at the end of Eve's life? Eve explained that judgment would come upon humanity not once, but twice. The first judgment would come through water, and the second judgment would come through fire. Both events would test the entire human race, and nothing would escape that testing. Hearing words like that made the moment feel heavy. Water and fire were not small things. Water could cover the whole earth, and fire could burn everything in sight. If judgment really came in those forms, how would anyone keep the truth alive for the future? That question led to the next instruction, and Eve spoke with careful detail so nothing would be misunderstood. Eve told every child to create records of everything that had been heard from Adam and Eve, everything about the garden, the command, the fall, and the warning that followed. These records had to be written on tablets, but not just one kind. Some had to be made of stone, and others had to be made of clay. At first, the instructions sounded strange. Why use 2 different materials for the same message? Eve explained the reason in a way that made everyone pause and think. If the first judgment came by water, clay tablets would soften and disappear, but stone tablets would survive. If the judgment came by fire, stone could crack from heat, but clay would harden instead of breaking. The idea felt almost like planning for the worst, before the worst even arrived. Was Eve expecting destruction for sure? Or was Eve making sure that truth would never vanish no matter what happened? The gathering grew quieter as the meaning of those words settled in. This was not just a final speech. This sounded like preparation for events far beyond one lifetime. Adam had once asked whether God still held anger or whether mercy had returned, and that question never fully left the family. Eve knew that uncertainty still lived in every mind, and that final moment became the time to give an answer without guessing. Instead of leaving confusion behind, Eve chose to leave instructions, warnings, and a way to preserve memory. Why wait until the last days to speak about something so important? Perhaps the right moment only comes when life feels close to the end. Perhaps some truths feel too heavy to carry until the final hour. After giving the instructions, Eve lifted hands toward heaven and began to pray. No long speech followed after that. No argument, no fear, no struggle. Just prayer, as if everything that needed to be said had already been spoken. The gathering watched in silence, understanding that the moment marked the closing of a chapter that began in the garden itself. A strange thought could not be avoided. If those tablets were really made, and if those warnings were really written, how much of that truth survived through water, through fire, and through time itself? That question stayed hanging in the air long after the gathering ended, and the strange part was the way it refused to fade from people's minds. It felt like the final words of Eve were not only speaking about something that happened long ago, but also reaching forward to every generation that would come after, almost like a warning that history keeps repeating itself in ways we rarely notice. The more the story was told, the more people started paying attention to details that had always been there, but never fully explained. Little by little, it became clear that what most of us learned about Eden might only be a small part of a much bigger story. And trust me, what comes next is where everything starts to feel different from what we were taught growing up. So stay with me till the very end, because the hidden truths we are about to get into completely change how the story of the beginning is understood. The hidden truths about Eden the Ethiopian Bible reveals. The usual telling about Eden always says Eve saw the fruit, felt curious, and then made a mistake. But the Ethiopian explanation suggests something much more complicated. God later explained that the real temptation did not come from hunger or simple curiosity, but from a desire for something bigger, something higher, something close to divinity itself. That alone already makes the moment feel different, because the question becomes obvious. Was the fruit really the problem? Or was the real problem the desire behind the choice? According to the life of Adam and Eve, the serpent did not just talk Eve into eating. The serpent placed the poison of wickedness into the fruit itself, and that poison was described as lust, not only in the sense of physical desire, but as a strong craving for power, greatness, and an exalted state. That detail changes the entire meaning of the moment. Instead of a simple act of disobedience, the event starts looking like a careful corruption of the human heart. If the fruit carried that kind of influence, then the temptation was not only outside, but also inside. That leads to another question. If the desire for greatness was already possible, then what exactly made the garden safe before that moment? Another part of the Ethiopian account adds something that rarely gets mentioned. The garden was not arranged randomly. Adam stayed with male animals, and Eve stayed with female animals. That separation sounds small at first, but then the moment of the fruit starts looking more serious. When Eve came to Adam with the fruit, the choice in front of Adam was not just about eating or not eating. Adam understood the warning, and Adam knew the consequence, yet the decision still went the wrong way. Why would someone make that choice, while fully aware of the result? The explanation given in the Ethiopian version suggests that Adam looked at the situation and realized something painful. Without Eve, the garden would not feel like paradise anymore. That thought alone changes the meaning of the fall. Instead of pure weakness, the decision begins to look like a choice between obedience and companionship. That raises another question that does not get asked often. Was the fall only about disobedience, or was the fall also about love, loyalty, and the fear of being alone? The consequences that followed also sound different in the Ethiopian telling. God did not only send Adam and Eve out of the garden, God removed the bright nature that once covered them. That bright nature was described as a kind of glory that made everything clear, peaceful, and full of understanding. Once that brightness disappeared, confusion entered the world. The fall brought three major changes. First came total depravity, meaning human nature lost the ability to stay perfectly good without struggle. Second came deformation of the image of God, meaning perfect knowledge and perfect holiness were no longer natural to human life. Third came death, not only physical death, but also spiritual separation. That moment marked the beginning of suffering. Violence, pain, sickness and poverty did not exist before that point. But after the fall, those things became part of the world. Hearing that explanation makes another question come to mind. If the fall removed brightness and understanding, then how much of human struggle today connects back to that single moment in the garden? Life after Eden also sounds very different when told from Eve's side. The Ethiopian account describes the first steps outside the garden in a way that feels almost shocking. Adam and Eve walked on the ground without even knowing what the ground really was. Stones hurt their feet. Sand felt strange. Cold air felt frightening. The world outside Eden looked dark and heavy compared to the place left behind. A cave became the first shelter, but the cave also felt like a prison. That detail alone makes the loss feel more real. Inside the garden, angels could be seen. Light covered everything, and nothing caused fear. Outside the garden, everything felt unknown. Imagine the feeling of going from a place filled with light into a place filled with shadows, without understanding why. That moment leads to another question. Did the punishment hurt more because of the pain itself, or because of the memory of what once existed? Eve's words later focused on lessons that future generations needed to remember. Partnership mattered because survival outside Eden required unity. Worship mattered because prayer became the only way to stay close to God after the loss of direct presence. Teaching children also became important because the first children did not even understand what death meant. Imagine having to explain death to someone who had never seen anything die before. That alone shows how different life was before the fall. Eve wanted future generations to understand that choices carry weight, desire can change everything, and forgetting God leads to suffering that spreads far beyond one moment. That message makes the entire story feel less like a simple warning and more like a long lesson about human nature. And when all these details come together, one final question stays in the mind. If the fall started with the desire to become greater, then how often does that same desire still lead people into the same kind of trouble today? With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.